Hi, everybody. Welcome to this webinar on international solidarity and its role within Friends of the Earth International. So you're all very welcome to this event. So I'm Aaron. I am the Global Citizenship Education and Activism Support Officer here with Friends of the Earth Ireland. And I work in the movement building team. I'm joined by my colleague Sarah and Finn from FO, England, Wales, Northern Ireland, who also plays a role as a kind of focal point for international solidarity within Friends of the Earth internationally as well. So I might ask Sarah to introduce herself as well and say hi to everyone.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us on well, it's sunny where I am, so I hope it's sunny where you are too, the end of summer or the kind of the beginning of autumn. So yeah, just like Aaron, I'm also working in global citizenship education and outreach. So a part of our work is encouraging and supporting people in being able to take action and learning about participatory methods of how to be active citizens, critical thinking, problem solving, and systems thinking. So a good bit of our context today is really understanding how local action, so how we as activists or individuals can support wider global solidarity. So really excited to have Finnian in today to talk.
Cheers, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Finnian. I'm the International Activism Officer with Friends of the Earth, England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So that means that I coordinate a lot of our solidarity work. And a key part of that is supporting our own groups to get involved in international solidarity. So that should hopefully have some resonance for speaking to you tonight. And I'm also one of the two regional focal points for the ISS, or the Internationalist Solidarity System in Europe. So I help to coordinate solidarity work at kind of European level as well. Yeah, and you'll hopefully be able to hear that I am one of you. Yeah, despite about 8 or 9 years in London now, I've stubbornly made sure not to lose any of my accents. So yeah, it's kind of an extra reason that I'm delighted to be able to talk to you all tonight.
Brilliant. So just like some housekeeping before we start. So first of all, I'm going to put in the chat here our International Solidarity Action Pledge. So maybe some of you have signed this already. So this is basically a way we are collating details of people that might be willing to take more high bar actions along the lines of that sort of local piece of action as part of global solidarity that Sarah mentioned, in cases where, and Finn will be going through cases of like, instances where maybe international solidarity needs to be called upon, but in certain cases where we need to, say, mobilize people in Ireland, or have requests for signing on to statements or letters, or taking action by contacting embassies or TDs. So we are going to be basically using this list as like kind of a more rapid response way to deal with international solidarity issues within the network if they arise and need that kind of response from people in Ireland. So apologies for it being quite quiet so far. We're still kind of working on it and planning on rolling it out on a more proactive basis. And this launch today, or this discussion today, is part of that. I'll also be sharing that at the end of the session, and I'll be sending it out in emails to as follow-up for participants. I'd also just like to add that this is funded by Irish Aid under the Global Citizenship Education Program. And they very generously fund our work on looking at issues of global inequality and local activism that can address that. So we're very thankful for that. And because it's funded by Irish Aid, I will have a feedback form for you all to fill out, which I will also post in the final few minutes before we close the webinar. And I would love it if everybody could just take 2 minutes to fill it out then and there, because it makes our ability to run these events in future way more sustainable. The more feedback we get, the more we can improve it, and the more likely we are going to be able to run it as well after that. So I think that's it from us in terms of housekeeping. Oh, there's a Q&A. So this, if you go down into the bottom bar on Zoom. You will be able to ask questions. You can upvote or thumbs up each other's questions so that the cream of the crop rises to the top. And we will have time for Q&A with Finn after his presentation. So please, if anything comes to mind during that, type it into the box and we will address it when we get to the Q&A. So yeah, I think that's it from us. I might hand it over to Finn to begin with his presentation.
Great. Cheers, Aaron. Just bringing up my slides here. Yeah, you should all be able to see these. If not, Sarah or Aaron, please shout at me. So, yeah, I thought I'd start by acknowledging the fact that we're part of Friends of the Earth International. So, Friends of the Earth International is the largest environmental grassroots or largest grassroots environmental justice network in the world. I think it's 53 years old now. It might be 52. There's 73 sister organizations in it, so you can see them in all of these, parts of the world where the little donut is identifying a Friends of the Earth presence. So, right across the world, it sort of encompasses a breadth of different experiences and backgrounds and contexts. And what being part of Friends of the Earth International means that we work together to support one another's struggles, to coordinate campaigns in general, kind of campaigning, overarching campaigning ideas together, to explore the links between the existing work that each sister organization is running and I'm going to speak a bit about this evening to shine spotlights at particular moments. There's a very flat democratic structure to Friends of the Earth International. It's kind of been honed over the decades to counteract, power imbalances that might sort of naturally be there between different parts of the world. So it works quite well together. And when I speak about Friends of the Earth International to groups in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, I kind of lead with this and lead with the framing that by virtue of being part of a local group or part of or just a Friends of the Earth supporter, you're a part of this network too, and that's really important to remember, I think. And there's no better way to feel part of that network than to take solidarity action, I think. So, the network itself, lots of our sister organizations either work with or are themselves environmental and human rights defenders. You might have heard this term before, and there's actually different terminology for sometimes people will say environmental defenders, sometimes people will say land defenders. Friends of the Earth International actually uses the terminology defenders of territories, but leaving the sort of terminological differences aside, essentially an environmental and human rights defender is someone who protects their land or their forest or river from environmentally destructive projects. This can be very dangerous work. So there's various organizations that monitor this on a yearly basis and release reports on it. And a recent Global Witness report found that there is the equivalent of 1 murder every 2 days against environmental defenders around the world. So that's a horrific statistic to begin with, but even behind that statistic itself, there's other attacks against offenders that are not reflected in it. So there's the threats of physical violence, there's the actual physical violence, there's the arbitrary detention, there's the psychological abuse, sexual violence. So it can be very dangerous work to do, depending particularly on what part of the world a defender is operating in, and beyond that, depending on the extent to which often corporate power can get away with carrying out attacks and the level of oversight that they have to operate under. So to respond, Friends of the Earth International, I mean, organically sort of responded to this over the decades that it's worked together. But over the last 6 years or so, it's really started to formalize. It does that through the Internationalist and Solidarity System. And that means that we work together to respond rapidly and stand in solidarity when a sister organization or an ally of theirs needs support. Yeah, so one way to, it's a word to kind of sum up that approach is internationalism. It's essentially when we take our local front lines or our local issues, our local campaigns, and we place them in global terms and put them in a sort of global relevance and start to look for those links that unite the things we're working on. It places us in a bigger picture. And at this point, I was going to pause for just a second and invite people to share ideas on why you think it's important for our work to incorporate internationalism. I think you can all operate the chat. Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong on that.
I don't believe they can. They can use the
Yeah.
Q&A, but also what people can do is they can raise their hand and we can allow them to talk if that works. We have a relatively small number here, so it might not be too difficult if anyone wants to speak up.
Yeah, sure. If anyone wants to share some quick thoughts on why you think internationalism is important, I'd love to hear them.
Or if you don't feel comfortable talking, you can put it in the Q&A. Yeah, I'm going to bring in Rosalind.
I haven't anything formulated to say in my head, just that it seems to me pretty obvious. I think I came to environmentalism through internationalism. It would have been through working in global citizenship education or development education, as we called it then. To come to see the central position that the environment had in all of that. And yeah, so I think one is inextricably linked to the other.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, completely agree.
Sorry, we didn't prep you that there'd be interactive bits to this webinar.
Yeah, that's my bad. Sorry, my
That's
oversight.
okay.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I think that's it until the Q&A. Don't worry. Yeah, I'm gonna share to kind of pull on that thread a little bit more. I'm gonna share 4 ideas now for why I think internationalism is important, or international solidarity. I think it's fair enough to say the two terms are interchangeable for our purposes here anyway. So the first one is that it builds a movement. We're probably all well aware that the challenges we face are towering ones, and it's at the core of the Friends of the Earth theory of change that to respond to them appropriately, we need people power. So internationalism kind of allows us to start to tap into those numbers, to give us the numbers that we need to win the fights for environmental justice around the world that we need to win. And it also helps us to build that movement as well at the same time and increase those numbers, and allows us to coordinate our coalitions as well and build a more cohesive and impactful movement. It also motivates us. So kind of in line with the previous slides, campaigning can be a lonely venture at times. It often feels that way on local campaigning. Sometimes it might just be yourself who's campaigning on an issue, or often it's a small group. So it feels like you're sort of working away on your own. But when you engage with international solidarity action, it breaks that sort of feeling of isolation. So whether you give it or whether you receive it, it reminds you that you are part of this much, much bigger movement around the world. And also, I think kind of gives you a sense that we can tap into that resource again, of numbers out there in society and build our movement even further. It's highly strategic to take international solidarity action. So by supporting frontline struggles around the world, or struggles that environmental offenders are involved in, we're getting to fight environmentally destructive industries at the points where they are expanding. So, if that mining company is trying to establish a new mine in a community, and that community is standing up for their rights, the most effective way that you can respond to it is by supporting that community in whatever way they need, from biodiverse rich parts of the world. So there's actually 80% of remaining biodiverse rich areas in the world are on indigenous lands. So indigenous people around the world are protecting those areas, they're maintaining them. When their land is threatened by destructive projects, by logging, mining, fossil fuels, whatever it might be, again, by supporting statistic is that that struggles and campaigning against fossil fuel infrastructure in North America and Canada has actually resulted in the equivalent of a quarter's worth of the combined emissions of both countries for a year staying in the ground. So that means people that are fighting pipelines, or fighting new extractive projects being set up, or trying to stall them, are managing to keep this massive amount of emissions in the ground. So basically, when we support the struggles, the frontline struggles, as we call them, of defenders around the world, we're actively saving nature and we're actively keeping fossil fuels in the ground, and it's one of the most effective ways to do that. It also keeps us all safe. So the space for civil society is shrinking around the world. Over the past year, solidarity calls in relation to shrinking civil society space have gone through the Friends of the Earth International system in France, El Salvador, Colombia, Croatia, Bangladesh, Argentina, Armenia, Georgia, and Uganda. So at these times, I mentioned already, the importance of shining a spotlight, and that's what we do with a lot of our rapid response solidarity work. And that helps build crucial international pressure in these narrow windows, to try and halt and stifle impending attacks or further attacks that communities or individual activists might be experiencing. So just a few months earlier, an example of this was a Ugandan activist called Stephen Quikarisa, who has campaigned a lot against the French company Total's operations in Uganda. He was arrested, and Friends of the Earth France works closely with them. They and others kind of responded to this and sent out solidarity calls, including to each of the Friends of the Earth sister organizations. And Stephen was released within about 2 days or so, I think it was, and the authorities actually noted the fact that they had received this international pressure. Unfortunately, he didn't have a great time while he was in prison. He came out badly beaten, but it could have been worse had that international pressure not helped to stand in. In the words of Bo Ecuador, this is actually a photo of them above the photo above that says Justicia, which means justice already, or justice now. They had this quote at just last year's biennial general meeting that I found really kind of compelling, that I wanted to share here. You could potentially do an entire session on the work that FO Ecuador do. They're like really, really incredible organization. They're made up of, I think it's 5 or 6 different indigenous communities. They've been fighting. Initially, they were set up to fight Chevron and all the ecological destruction that Chevron has caused in Ecuador. They've been doing that for decades. They have their own kind of food sovereignty programs where they produce their own like ecologically sustainable food, and this you could go on and on about them, I think. But a really wonderful thing they said, and they've actually only officially joined Friends of the Earth International, and they said, we feel safer since joining FO. We have seen a decrease in attacks. So that's just a nice example of how solidarity work, and there might be this kind of immediate impact that you get with taking solidarity actions to keep someone safe, but it also allows groups and organizations who are doing incredible work to have the confidence to continue their work more broadly and to develop their work, because they know it's not the case with FO Ecuador. It's exactly in terms of their numbers, but if you're a relatively smaller sister organization, you're going to feel bigger and you're going to feel more confident, if you're going into that police station by virtue of knowing that you have this international network backing you up. And I thought usually, I mean, this is something that I discuss in more detail when I'm speaking to activists in the UK, but I thought it's probably still pertinent to leave it in here that the space for protest is shrinking in the UK too. And one reason I mentioned that is because often, I mean, we've seen an increase in police repression in the States as well, in America that is, and often European countries aren't far behind, or Ireland might not necessarily be too far behind that trend of shrinking space for protest and increasingly militarized policing on activists. And also because we think that we do, but it's also something that we draw from, it's a well that we go to support our own campaigning. So this is the bottom photo is FO Brazil, and they're one of various sister organizations who took a solidarity in Northern Ireland last year against around something called the Universal Periodic Review. But basically just a UN review that was critical of the UK human rights record. Yeah, so I also wanted to pull out this important quote and story. So this is Gustavo. He was, I think at this stage, the former director of Otros Mundos, which is Friends of the Earth in Mexico. And Gustavo was actually present during the assassination of Berta Cáceres. For those of you who haven't heard of Berta Cáceres, she was a renowned Honduran environmental defender. She managed to defeat a dam that was being built in her area in Honduras. And she was assassinated for the work that she did for environmental defenders and for indigenous people in Honduras. So Gustavo was there with her at the time, and it became, because of probable police collusion in her murder, it was quite dangerous for Gustavo. So he immediately took refuge in the Mexican embassy, and he had to stay there for about 2 weeks, and there was question marks over his safe passage back to Mexico. And at the time, this was 2016. At the time, sister organizations, I know Friends of the Earth, England, Wales, and Northern Ireland were involved, but they were one of various organizations that were doing everything they could to, again, shine that spotlight, build that diplomatic pressure in whatever way they could to secure his safe passage. And I'll take a moment to read out the quote from Gustavo after he made it back to Mexico. I know what made it possible for me to leave that country where people live defenseless and under total impunity. It was because you were backing me by my side with so much solidarity. Thank you for your actions. Each and every one of you contributed to the government releasing me. The strong voice of international pressure and solidarity reached me even there and made itself heard. yeah, I'm going to run through a few examples of solidarity calls now to kind of, you know, I've got 2 or 3 stories here, but also kind of give you some of the nuts and bolts of what solidarity calls look like as well. So 2 more recent success stories are firstly last summer, FO Bangladesh put out a call for people to stand with them against a tree felling program that was taking place in Dhaka. So there was this massive tree felling program that had been implemented without any community consultation that the mayor was carrying out. FO Bangladesh pushed back against it, and they called on sister organizations to take photos and post comparisons of areas of urban tree cover with what was going on in Dhaka at the time. So this was successful. It led to the tree felling being stalled and reversed, and then the campaign being replicated in, I think it was 11 other cities around Bangladesh as well. So you can see an example of one we took here in Camden in comparison to what was going on in Dhaka. It's important to say, and something that's true of, I think, all solidarity work generally, and I'll probably mention it again in a moment, but it's definitely not the fact that someone took a photo in Camden that made the difference in this case. It was that Friends of the Earth Bangladesh ran a really, really good campaign, but in relation to campaigning, so aside from, because some solidarity calls are in support of campaigns, in relation to campaigning, it can just make that difference when international pressure comes in on top. So it can be that extra 10% or that extra 5% that makes a decision maker say, okay, we're gonna do a U-turn here. Another one is Prince of Youth Mozambique, or JA, as they're called, Justica Ambiental, where ran, was at the end of 2023. They were running a workshop with 6 activists who were organizing against the Maputo Dam, which is this mega dam that's planned in Mozambique. And on the way back from that workshop, these activists were arrested without reason, and JA's response was to put a rapid response call out asking for people to record WhatsApp videos and send them in, demanding the release of the 6 activists. So various sister organizations took part in that. My own one took part in it again, and it led to this speedy release of the activists. And again, Ja afterwards told us, in this case, if it was the international pressure that made the difference. So again, a really good example of how, something that can be as simple as recording a WhatsApp message on your phone, but within that particular window for action can have a really significant difference. And again, an example of how, next time that workshop might be organized, or next time JA are walking into a police station, they're going to feel more confident knowing that they have the support of so many of us around the world. So we have over the past 10 months, I mean, previously we have done a lot of solidarity work with our sister organization in Palestine, known as PENGON. So that's the Palestinian Environmental NGO Network. And obviously particularly so over the past 10 or so months. I just want to quickly mention a few key points. we've set up a fundraiser for which I can share the link to in the chat in a moment. And that's for PENGON to supply relief to people within Gaza through contacts that they have. They've done this on numerous occasions already. And at one stage, that fundraiser was actually making $2,000 a week, which is really, really wonderful, and something that we would like to keep running as much as possible, because obviously the need is really dire there. We held a webinar earlier in the year with a host of MEPs where we kind of developed the environmental narrative, or the narrative around the environmental impacts of the war, which is something that we've kind of done more broadly, and is an important kind of point that we can bring to the table, talking about the environmental destruction as well as the horrific human destruction that Israel is currently implementing. It's across the network, we kind of marked a coordinated social media moment on Human Rights Day in December, and then beyond that, I think currently we're in a phase where we would like to kind of formalize at a higher level our individual sister organizations. And there wouldn't be time to get into it all. I mean, in relation to my own sister organization, I could, we've been pushing the government for a ceasefire, for an arms embargo, and for UNRWA funding, which was reinstated recently. And we're in the midst of supporting our groups to take action against the arms industry in their local areas in solidarity with Pengon. And I want to share a quick Pengon quote as well from one of the webinars that we had with them. This is from a leading Pengon member in response to someone else from the Friends of the Earth Network saying that they felt powerless. And she said, "You said you feel powerless, but hearing about the things groups are doing makes us feel powerful. It gives us the energy to move on and continue our fight. Even if the action seems little to you, to us it means a lot." So yeah, for me, that's a beautiful and succinct way to sum up that motivational aspect of solidarity action. So here's a quick run through what calls can look like. So first one to mention is there's a lot of calls to co-sign statements. A recent example is one from Friends of the Earth Japan calling on other sister organizations to sign on to a statement against Japanese governmental support for carbon capture and storage projects. So these can add real. One sister organization is handing something into their own government to see a host of other sister organizations there in support. In terms of individuals, generally these statements don't take on, sometimes they do, but often they don't take on individual signatures. It's more organizational signatures. So that's something that I think that's for Aaron and Sarah and others to consider, how maybe that could be coordinated if individual people are interested in signing. But definitely for individual local groups, I think that's really worthwhile. And I'll mention that again in just a moment. Fundraisers are kind of increasingly becoming the case. Unfortunately, I think that's probably a reality of the fact that we're moving closer into further into the impacts of climate and ecological breakdown around us. So a recent one was the Faux Brazil call in response to the Rio Grande do Sul flooding that happened. I think 4 months ago now it was. So yeah, we can share that and donate to that fundraiser, and that's one that generally people can share wherever they want, and that like supports in this instance, and what it generally does is it supported Faux Brazil to support relief efforts, but also to support kind of community responses to how to build back in a better way to the destruction from disasters like this. Photo actions are really lovely, simple one to take. Kind of similar to the WhatsApp message I mentioned in relation to Friends of the Earth Mozambique. So one example of this, and this is about 3 years ago now, was the Wadas community in Indonesia. Friends of the Earth Indonesia was supporting them. There was a mine proposed to be built on their land. So very straight up, simple call to take a photo with a sign that says "Save Wadas," and then usually it's share it online with a particular hashtag, or else send it back into a particular place where they can all be circulated. So again, the important thing here is there's a narrow window when these actions are taken quickly. Even though they seem simple, they can really have an effect. Next one is in-person actions. These don't happen as often, but there are calls to have demos outside embassies, for instance, or outside headquarters of companies. So an example of this one was a phone in Norway asking for groups to take actions in solidarity with indigenous Sami people in Norway who are having their land rights encroached upon by the government. Interestingly, for a wind farm. And yeah, it can be, this can just be a really important way to show like physical in-person dedication. And again, there's that kind of thing of sharing it online or sending it back to motivate allies, or for them to be able to say, look, someone in London bothered to take the time to stand up for Sami land rights as well. And the last one is social media posting. So there can be a lot of coordinated kind of social media sharing. Which again, even though it might not seem it in kind of intuitively, you might think it's just sharing something on social media, but it's again that spotlight effect. If many people around the world are raising something at the same time, it can stay the hand of a decision maker or of someone that's about to carry out an attack somewhere. So a recent example of that was social media work around the Georgian foreign agent law. Yeah, I have the feeling I'm potentially running over time, but I'm nearly at the end of my slides now. I'll quickly mention our own solidarity action list, because I manage a list as well for our own groups in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, to send calls out to. And a nice example of one of these calls and the kind of pickup it got was a Swiss organization who supports a Malaysian ally that we also work with. Were being sued, and they were sharing a statement calling on the lawsuit to be dropped. These are known as SLAP suits, or strategic litigation against public participation. Essentially, when a big company sues a bunch of activists to scare them into stopping their work. So 17 of the 75 organizations who signed on were Friends of the Earth organizations, which was great. And 6 of those were local action groups. So this is where I think it's, it can be powerful for a local group to sign on to these statements or show this support. If a decision maker or someone who holds the power is reading down through the list of signatories and they suddenly see, oh, why the hell do Birmingham Friends of the Earth care about, what we're doing, or care about our lawsuit here? That can really give them pause, I think. Yeah. Another lovely example of a win against SLAP suits is that Malaysian ally I mentioned. They're called Save Rivers. So again, Samling, a big timber company in Malaysia, we're suing them, and they, as well as running a really great campaign, getting them to drop the lawsuit or stop the SLAP, they called on groups to take international solidarity. So here's examples on the right of some of the groups in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland taking those photo actions, and then there was a website where they were uploaded to. And there was a big kind of collage of them. So Samling decided to drop the case the night before it was due to be heard in court, which was a lovely result. Okay, and that's me. I hope I haven't gone too far over time, Aaron.
No, you're grand. Thanks so much for all that. There's a lot to I think chew on there. Yeah, you'd mentioned the Pengon fundraiser, and that's also something we can send out in kind of a follow-up resource pack to this webinar if people are interested in donating to one of our affiliates who are obviously very hard hit by Israeli occupation at the minute. So yeah, that would be great if you could send that on to people. And also, yeah, just picking up on some of the things you're saying there in terms of what practically groups and individuals can do. I think that was like really useful and gave us a lot to think about. And I suppose as well, when we're developing how we want to get responses or get like responses from our supporters, people who are interested in taking those higher bar kind of international solidarity actions. I'm also interested in hearing from people, supporters in the Zoom right now, as to what you think you would like to engage with or would be helpful, because that'll help tailor how we want to best utilize you and your enthusiasm. So, yeah, if anyone has any questions, please put them into the Q&A now. I'll maybe give a second for people to type, and if not, we can have our own. Or sorry, do you have a question?
No, I might just add that this is the time to do it, is to put your ideas into the chat box, or through, the Q&A. The form that we're going to be sending out, or kind of looking at in a few minutes, doesn't capture that information. But maybe it's worthwhile for us to send like just a follow-up email, asking to capture more of that, thoughts from the wider people who signed up. To say we had 45 people sign up to join this meeting today. So, not everyone could have shown up. So we want to hear more from our supporter list too. And just to thank you, Finnian, like I think I've only started, this is my 3rd month with Friends of the Earth now. So getting to learn so much from the previous experience and what has, been the wins and successes has been really heartening, and really quite emotional to listen to as well. So I really appreciate it. And I think I probably speak for a lot of people here that would have been really impactful. And gives me more hope in how we in Ireland here can start increasing our responsiveness to sort of global issues through things like our international solidarity kind of list. But that's by no means the only way to do it too. I'm just kind of being cognizant of that.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming and speaking on a lovely summer's day, on a Zoom webinar. Finn, really appreciate it. We have a comment there from Patricia. It's more of a comment to the question, but she says, I think it is so important that we sign up to international solidarity. There is power in numbers. I think that's really a takeaway we can all gather from today. Any other questions? I mean, maybe if we're waiting, I could ask a question, Finn, if that's useful. So I suppose, thinking about the Irish context, we have had kind of interactions with other foe groups. For example, Colombia sends out Agua Viva because some of the coal that is burnt in Money Point power station is coming from areas in Colombia where there are, human rights abuses, and issues with, everything that comes with fossil fuel extraction and mining and all the rest of it. And I also know that there's like mining groups in Ireland, like the Communities Against the Injustices of Mining, who have built connections with other groups in the global south as well. Do you notice that there's any like special, I don't know, leverage or power if, say, like a foe group in an area that is, maybe in a country that has companies, or the state is exploiting another region? Is there anything special that they can do in that country? So like Ireland could do in solidarity with groups in Colombia. Is there any special power or messaging that carries, or do you think it's kind of the same across the board when groups act in solidarity?
Sorry, I don't think I'm fully following it. Is it what's the difference? Is it the same?
Is there more impact from, say, a group that is so like in Ireland, say, acting in solidarity with a foe affiliate in Colombia because our country is directly linked to the exploitation there? Does that carry more weight, or do you think it's kind of the same across the board, regardless of where foe groups are coming from?
Yeah, sorry, gotcha.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I think that everything's so circumstantial, isn't it? Like the context always differs. So I don't want my answer to sound like I'm dissuading that solidarity across the board, because I just think that's so important. And it even has this, in some ways it has this added value to it, where if there isn't a link, like, a kind of the logical link between the two countries, to say, well, why the hell would people in this part of the world care about this at all? That can have a power in itself. But I think probably the prevailing wisdom would be that if those links are there, exploit them. Definitely try and find them, try and get that hook, because that's also just a really good way to build your own movement around you, and get that local support as well. Yeah, so if they're there, great. Take them for everything they're worth. If they're not there, great. Find a way to make it work anyway. It's still powerful in a different way.
May I just make a comment on that too? Yeah, I agree. Like, I think oftentimes we hear here in Ireland when we say, we need to take climate action here in Ireland, and oftentimes you hear, well, if that country over there isn't doing enough, then why would I recycle or something like that? That's kind of what we hear sometimes. And I think maybe it's helping to contextualize. Actually, we have a really large global footprint also. So trying to make those links more about how connected our lives are in terms of our energy, our consumption, production, everything. So, like you say, good exploitative processes where we can target the bad guys, the polluters, rather than the other way around.
No other questions from participants. We have time for maybe one more. So I don't know, Sarah, if you had a particular question you wanted to ask.
I think one just popped up there.
Oh, it did
Or
indeed.
maybe not. It seems to me that, oh yeah, so Irene said, it seems to me that the stories told of action shared a common structure. So remembering, responding, reporting, and reframing. So looking at solidarity and action by essentially making the fuller story that the frontline defenders and people that are on the front lines of environmental destruction and damage, they're a part of a wider stories of where oppressive powers are coming in, if I'm paraphrasing that correctly. And then John has said, I think it would be useful if a list of actions which individuals can take in their daily lives could be drawn up in support of international actions too. That's a great suggestion as well. So I think, as our part on maybe our website or a subscription list develops, these are places in which we can show these are ways that you can take different types of actions in your lives in solidarity, and how they're relevant. Thank you so much for that suggestion.
Yeah. I might just move. Oh, there's one more Q&A. Okay, there's a few more Q&As. Right as we're supposed to be finishing up, but it's good to get the feedback. So I might bring these in, and then these are the last two, and then I will maybe do some housekeeping and kind of finish up. So I just want to say thanks for Pablo for the comment there. Thank you for the invitation. I'm from Ecuador, placed in Ireland for a couple of months. I'll be here for at least 2 years. And he's been involved in conservation and activist NGOs. And so he really appreciates us engaging with the Friends of the Earth International community. And so it's good to hear, it's good to hear from you, Pablo, and that, it's fantastic that you're here as well. So thanks for coming along. And then the last one here is actually a question from Sakita. So where there is no direct link in a country, do you or could you connect with, for example, Amnesty International, especially in the context of climate justice? I suppose there's a kind of a broader question there as well, as like how much does the Friends of the Earth Internationalist Solidarity System interact with other NGOs and civil society organizations as part of its kind of call out process? So I don't know, Finn, if you have an answer for that.
Yeah, so I mean, for Friends of the Earth International Solidarity work, we're led by where there's a presence of a sister organization in a country. So that's kind of the starting point. So that link would usually really always exist, led by that presence, and then by where the need is greatest. I mean, there are cases, in relation to my own organization anyway, there are cases where because of our campaign has developed, some bilateral relationship with an organization in a country that doesn't have a Friends of the Earth sister organization. And then if there's some sort of call or opportunity for solidarity, well, then definitely we take it. Yeah, via Friends of the Earth, that's kind of the priority. That's not to say that, if there's an issue, I mean, I'll speak for local groups in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. I don't want to speak for those in Ireland, but if there was an issue of solidarity that was in line with our principles, and it was pertinent to a country without a sister organization. It's completely fine for one of our sister organizations to try and do what they can and to try and make whatever links they can with groups in that country to work on it once it's in line with our principles. But in terms of the work that I would be supporting, generally it's always along those lines of a sister organization is what directs it. And also another thing to note that I didn't mention in my presentation, but it's important to bear in mind, is that there's a fairly hard and fast rule that we only do what we're asked to do. So we don't, it has been damaging in the past when, with good intentions, organizations or groups have kind of stepped beyond what the actual solidarity call is and thought, oh, maybe we can go and do this thing. And without input from the people that are actually affected, that can be less than ideal, and sometimes it can be damaging. Yeah, so that's just something that's worth bearing in mind as well. But hopefully that answered the.
Yeah, I think that was really clear. Okay, what I might do then is I'm just going to take us through some like final bits before we finish up. So first of all, I'm just going to give everyone here a sneak preview of a graphic that is being worked on for our international solidarity list that I've mentioned, so that we're encouraging people to sign up to, so that you can kind of be on call for these higher bar, like slightly more ad hoc response actions as needed. So this is a little graphic we've made up to advertise it, and it contains a QR code there at the bottom if you want to take out your phone and scan it now. I've also posted the link to sign the pledge in the chat, and the link will be going in the follow-up materials to this webinar too. But slightly more importantly for now, if I could have your attention for like 2 more minutes, is I need you, or I strongly request that you fill out the feedback form for this webinar. So this is the QR code for that. I will also post a link to the form in the chat, so that we have it here. If you have it, if you can do it on your phone as well, if you scan the QR code there, and it does take like 2 seconds. Otherwise, let me just get this. The link to the type form is also okay. Also here in the chat. So if you could please take 2 minutes to fill that out, and then we'll come back and finish up.
Great. Well, as you guys are doing that, there's just one last comment that came in, was that Irene felt that they liked the notion of working locally, nationally and internationally on particular issues in a strategic manner to reduce the sustained and societal fragmentation towards isolation and disconnection, and to counter to what collaborations and solidarity are. So yeah, thank you for that comment as well. Like we say, from our perspective, especially through like our global citizenship education program, this is, a big part of the work is helping people to see those interconnected issues and making them relatable to everyday life, and how we basically can support one another and direct each other towards fossil-free infrastructure, but also including, protecting our, the biodiversity of different places and places within our own country too.
Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. Okay, I'm going to leave this for 1 more minute to fill out the form. The form will also be going out in the feedback or in the follow-up. So if you didn't get a chance to fill it out today, if you keep an eye on your emails where the recording of this webinar and everything else will be, you can fill it out there as well. Okay.
Yeah, it's awesome. It usually takes less than 2 minutes, and it makes a really big impact for us in being able to continue to support this sort of work.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to presume those that are going to fill out the form have done so already, and if not, you can come back to it. So yeah, make sure to open that link and make sure to
It was
fill
1
it
minute
out.
and 40 seconds, Aaron, so it's even less than than 2.
Okay.
It's the average time.
Okay, very good. So yeah, I think that kind of brings us to the end of our webinar tonight. So, I appreciate that it's not as like, some of the learning hubs, it's not as maybe large in terms of number of panelists, but we really thought this was an important topic to bring to people. And it's been on our to-do list for a while to kind of extend this international solidarity stuff into the work that we do more generally in Friends of the Earth Ireland and integrate it and find ways for groups and individuals to be involved in responding to those issues facing kind of environmental and human rights defenders that are often operating in so much more difficult contexts than we are in Ireland. In many, like we're all facing climate breakdown, but in many ways we are extremely privileged compared to those that are struggling in different parts of the world and are going to be harder hit by climate breakdown itself. So I think it's really imperative that we come together and work collectively to defend each other and improve the conditions facing people that are, suffering repression because of their activism, which, doesn't happen on the same scale here, which is, it's to our benefit, but it is kind of a vast inequality globally. So, yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Like I said, all of the stuff will be going out after. So the sign up form for the pledge to take these actions, the feedback form, and the Pengon fundraiser that Finn mentioned, as well as the recording of this webinar. So I think that kind of brings us to a close here. I'd like to thank Irish Aid for funding this project as well. And I might just pass it back to Sarah or Finn if you have any final words.
No, thank you. And thank you so much, Finnian, for taking the time and really helping us along in this process too. Really greatly appreciated.
Yeah, thank you so much, Finn.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. Yeah, really, I'm happy to talk about this stuff generally, but also, yeah, because it's for Ireland. Like I said, there's an extra draw. So yeah, any way I'm able to help move this work along, I'm very happy to do that.
Yeah, well, you can come back to the motherland anytime you want, Finn. I think we'd be delighted to have you. Okay.
Okay, well, I hope everyone has a nice, restful evening, and thank you so much for taking the time out, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. All right, enjoy. Bye-bye.
Thanks all.